Okay. The link you just posted, I've got it marked as, or it comes up as private, by the way.
Oh, it copied settings. Just a sec.
No worries.
Okay. I had that idea earlier and then I forgot it, and then I just got reminded, so I wrote it down. I will make the stream public.
All right, sweet. Um, okay, I think that's, yeah, working now. Yeah, so the link I posted there, I had an idea for some stuff to do today. Happy to do other things as well, of course. But this was sort of related to some thoughts that I had re the PDF I made on Solomonoff Induction the other day. And I realized that I don't think we've spent a particular time looking at post-mortems particularly. So I thought that might be a thing that we could talk a bit about.
Yeah, one of the main things for postmortems is if you can find like a clear error, like something gets criticized and you're like, okay, I was wrong. And a lot of people, when they admit they were wrong, they're like, okay, well I admitted I was wrong, time to move on, I'm done with that. And they don't want to think about it anymore. Whereas like figuring out, trying to come up with like a model of what caused the error is really important. So then you can figure out, will it cause other errors should something be changed? Because
Yep.
don't make the same error again is not a good plan. Because usually errors come in categories. And sometimes
Yep.
the categories are big.
So yeah, so doing a postmortem might be like you might only catch an error that was particular to that, but chances are, as such, like that there's going to be more involved in that error than just some simple mistake that's local. Like most errors are going to have reach sort of thing, and so finding them out is important for future stuff.
Yeah, because
That
if you
makes
make a simple mistake, that means your process lets simple mistakes through. So that actually
yes,
sounds like a significant problem with your process.
yep, yeah, that makes sense. Um, that's something that I've sort of thought about a bit recently as well. Um, one of the uh, this wasn't a full postmortem, but one thing that did occur to me the other day was um, one of the I had a reply to one of Anne's emails. I'm not sure if it was this one, but yeah, where uh, like particularly here, um, in that there's like I think I've been making like sort of not hugely impactful mistakes, but definitely mistakes with how I've been replying to some of Anne's stuff about SICP. Um,
Yeah, so it depends a lot on what your goals are. Like, if this is stuff you wanted to write anyways, and it's what you'd be doing no matter what Anne was doing, then it makes sense to just write a bunch of stuff out and send it, and who cares what happens with Anne. But if your goal is like to help Anne, then it's important to look for bottlenecks, like key areas that make much bigger difference than other areas. For example, she apparently had not been watching any of the video lectures. So that's like a bigger deal than most of the other stuff.
Yeah. Um, that makes sense. I guess one thing as well, in terms of bottlenecks with uh, learning, I guess is we're talking about here. I mean, I guess there are bottlenecks in my process as well. Um, bottlenecks as applied to ideas, I guess, is a bit more abstract. And the idea of like excess capacity, I'm not sure exactly how to apply it in these sort of cases. Like it intuitively seems like a good idea, but I'm not, yeah, certain of how to apply it, if that makes sense.
Right. I think the videos are a good example because that thing would have a high impact with a low effort on your part to like link them or something. If you knew that was the problem.
Yeah.
Um it's you want to look for like high leverage points, like things that they're stuck on. And you can try to give them just like a little bit to try to get them past being stuck and then let them take it from there. Whereas if you hand them a bunch of stuff, then usually most of that is stuff they could do on their own. Or in the alternative, if you hand them a bunch of stuff and they couldn't have done any of it on their own, then it's not going to work even when you hand it to them. Like they're too out of their depth.
Yeah, that makes
If,
sense.
yeah, if someone's stuck on like a lot of things instead of just a few bottlenecks, then they just shouldn't be doing it.
Yep, that's like an indication they need to go back and work on some foundational skills or some ideas that are, yeah. I'm not sure if foundational is exactly the right word because they can themselves be built on lots of things, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a relative foundation.
Yes, yep.
A is built on B, so. And like, Hyperions talk about how there's more than one way to get to the truth. There isn't like a single road through foundations, but which is true. But usually there's only like, 1 to 3 known ways to build to a certain idea that people think are important. So there's only like in practice there's usually only a few current foundations that people think matter.
Yeah. Um, yep. Um, okay, so do we want to, or do you reckon it's a good idea to talk about this sort of stuff? Or do you have other ideas for what we should cover today?
Yeah, this is fine. We can take a look at it.
Yep. So part of this as well was I was thinking about, I started writing this. I didn't get very far, but what I was thinking in part because we've, um, oh, there's a draft up on my screen, by the way, just to provide a bit more context before we get into that. So it's on GitHub, but it's not published. And I was thinking particularly about like if we're going to, or as like I start working on work stuff again, and we scale back the frequency of tutorials, that it's going to be more important for me to make better use of the time in our tutorials. And where this idea sort of went to was that I should be like one of the more effective ways to do stuff would be like if I think I've made a mistake somewhere to do a postmortem before the session, which I meant to do today, but then didn't end up with enough time. Um, yeah, so this was sort of the inspiration for why I started thinking more about postmortems, um, which I hope that makes sense and lines up with or seems reasonable.
Yeah, yeah. If you've already put a lot of thought into something, then um, extra tips and criticism and whatever have more value than if you haven't taken it as for yourself first.
Yep. So in like in this case, the thing that I realized was that, so I mentioned, I think on Wednesday or last session, that I already had some thoughts on like what went wrong, or things that I didn't do particularly well with this SI thing, or at least like things that got in the way or stuff like that. So particularly, I put some notes down here in the notes for this tutorial. So it's sort of starting a postmortem. But I figured that that's, yeah, more beneficial to talk about. Also that like, I mean, I guess I don't really have particularly high confidence that my thoughts on Solomonoff induction are going to be like amazing. They're not going to like break particularly new ground. So they're not like super important for me to pursue. And I'm starting to get less interested in thinking about it as well, which I'm in some ways happy about because I feel like it's a bit of a distraction. Anyway, yeah, so I feel like it's more beneficial to talk about like the process that I had here than the actual content necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that like activity selection and time prioritization are pretty important in general. And it's pretty important to avoid things like recency bias, like looking at things just because they were made recently rather than like archives. You should have an actual opinion on which one or like how you're picking.
Yep. And I think, yeah, I sometimes leave that a bit too much to chance, as in it's sort of like, you know, things that take my fancy at the time, as opposed to things that are more important. One of the sort of related ideas that came out of thinking about this is, which I've sort of thought about a bit in the past, but not so deeply, is stuff like going back to the archives and finding mistakes that I made like some time ago, the FI archives. It's like 2017, 2018. I think there were a few posts in 2019. And then doing postmortems on those because they feel like they're more significant. Particularly like there's the democracy stuff, which is directly relevant. There's the times where I posted something and then either like got upset or stopped posting afterwards or things like that. And if those are bigger errors, then there might be like higher utility or marginal utility in analyzing those as opposed to like other stuff that might be simpler or easier or whatever else. Then again, doing stuff that's easy is like good as well, in that it's yeah, stuff that I'm more confident in succeeding in, so I can, so practicing both is probably good.
Yeah, one of the problems with older stuff is it often feels like you've changed a lot, that like some of the flaws are not current. Often that's also the stuff that'll jump out at you the most, is the stuff that you did change, because now like you learned something about it since then. So it's the easiest kind of issue to find.
Yeah, I guess this feels like it interacts with that idea of like when people say or like when people admit that they were wrong or whatever else, that they're done at that point instead of trying to go further. And so that feels like a, I don't know, almost like an anti-recency bias in that, like, oh, it happened a while ago and I'm different and I can spot all this stuff now, so therefore I don't need to think about it as much, which feels like a good way to fool yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're inclined to think that you probably haven't fully changed, then it could be useful
Well,
to find stuff.
I mean, yeah, one of the biggest sort of things that jumps out at me is I have a memory of writing something. I haven't been able to find it. That's why I say I have memory. Where I wrote something like, you know, if I was going to stop participating, then I should discuss it. Which I think I sort of like committed to a bit, but then arguably didn't really follow it up. Maybe, you know, coming back now is following it up a bit or like leading into that. But I definitely didn't do it at the time. Anyway, not being able to find that is sort of a bit annoying.
Yeah, I
But I
have
don't.
no specific memory of that, but I do remember that just people in general say things kind of like that before quitting, like fairly regularly. it's often stuff about they won't quit. Like they're definitely just gonna continue and they're super into truth seeking and whatever, and then, 2 weeks later they're gone.
Yeah. Um, I mean, on the one hand, I feel like there's like maybe an argument for a certain amount of leniency in that, like it doesn't. The benefit of like asynchronous communication is that it doesn't have to be, like right now or today or whatever else. But it's hard to argue that, oh, your last post was a year ago and consider yourself still here or something or other, or like still living up to that. I think there's like problems with that. Um,
Yeah, it's pretty rare that people come back after disappearing for like a month or more.
yeah, no, I can understand
And
that.
if
Which
they do come back at that point, it usually doesn't last very long.
I think it's a bit sad in the scheme of things, in that, I mean, one thing that I uh, like over the time where I didn't really participate in FI, I still like read your stuff occasionally, and particularly like podcasts and stuff. I used to keep up with a bit. So there's like other ways of like being around, but I'm not sure how typical that is, or whether people just like abandon everything as such.
Yeah,
So
I'm
sort of
not
like,
sure. I think it goes both ways. That's part of what the newsletter is meant for, is to keep giving people like reminders and opportunities to come back every couple weeks. Low
mm,
pressure though.
yep. And I found those like helpful as well. I read them more now than I used to, but they were sort of like a good reminder. Um,
Yeah, one of
yeah,
the reasons, by the way, that people say those kind of things is often I spot a warning sign that something's going wrong, they don't like it, they might be leaving soon, and then their response is to totally deny it and say they're going to stay or do all the right things or whatever. So it's like a way of avoiding the discussion about the problem that causes them to leave.
yeah, yeah. So that strikes me as uh, it's sort of. I mean, I guess there's like it feels like there's sometimes people are willing to admit or embrace problems that are smaller. So, like a problem about like being evasive or avoiding criticism, um, they might be capable and willing of embracing that on like a lower level, as in like actually discussing it and trying to fix it. But then if it gets too big and it's sort of like challenging stuff that they consider like either more core to themselves or core to the ideas that they have about themselves or things, um, that can be one of the really big challenges they run into, I guess. Um, like in some ways this relates to the post you had the other day about convincing people of like from of big things from small arguments. Sort of, I can't remember how you put it. Um,
Hmm.
um, yeah,
Yeah, something about extrapolating from small evidence, and it clashes with their all arguments have a degree of strength kind of mindset.
yeah. One thing I thought about that, by the way, was like I think an important idea that I've had for some time, like a long time, has been that you've got to, and it like got better after, like more solid after reading Beginning of Infinity. Um, but you have to like follow ideas to their conclusions. So, and any inconsistency is like an inconsistency, and uh, although like ideas can have maybe more or less significance in our life, an inconsistency is like there's no degree in inconsistency. Just an inconsistency is an inconsistency. Um, Yeah, and
Yeah,
I guess inconsistencies like pollute all the surrounding ideas, all the ideas that relate or rely on them.
yeah. So I've talked about that. Um, because people dismiss things as small errors, but there's no actual theoretical way to know the size of the error until after you come up with a solution. You can make like a informal estimate that it's a small error, but you don't really know until you come up with a solution what the extent of the error was, what things were affected. Like, because otherwise you're just predicting the future growth of knowledge. Like if you don't have the solution yet, you don't actually know the consequences and implications of the error and what it takes to fix it. You might have some guesses about what might work, but until you actually check them and decide that they work, you can't know what it's going to take to fix and how isolated it will be, or how much of a chain reaction it will cause with your other ideas.
Yeah, yep.
Because lots of things are small errors because a lot of our ideas are decently modular. Like there's groups of ideas with approximate independence from other groups, and then you have an error in one of those, and it doesn't affect anything outside the group, and the conclusion of the group doesn't change. But other times, the conclusion of the group changes, it chain reacts to other ideas, like it can just spread all over the place.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess that sort of relating that back, like in terms of ideas having or errors having like unpredictable reach. So I guess that's some of the reason that I'm a bit worried about like this SI tree that I made, because like it took quite like a reasonable amount of time to make it. There's about 2,000 words or so in it, and I wasn't really sure if I managed to like get anywhere decent. And I spent a lot of time talking about stuff that was like foundational. And anyway, so this is like potentially quite impactful because like if I had a bigger project and uh like had some idea in mind and then tried to go back and do all the foundational stuff and sort of didn't quite get to where I thought I would be able to, then that can be like a lot of potentially lost work. I guess I'm not sure if there's a shortcut to trying to figure that out better, but yeah, I don't feel like I've been particularly clear with that.
You can do better with these kinds of things if you have a good map of the relevant fields and knowledge, like a big tree or graph or something that maps out what builds on what's related to what are the open problems, etc. And that gives you a better context to do projects within and see like have you covered all your bases? Are there areas that you like didn't look into, so there could be a problem there that you have no idea about? Stuff like that.
Yep.
You can never
Yeah.
do perfect with these things, but you can survey the relevant stuff decently well.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems reasonable.
What does the slash mean?
Oh, so that's the like start of a function. Um, so like the function is started with a slash, and then you have arguments separated by spaces. Then the arrow is like indicating this is the body of the function.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so
Um,
define inputs, then maps to output.
yeah. Um, yeah. So I sort of I use this because like it's particularly because I want to talk about like types. Um, in like without knowing how things work, you can know what the relationships between various like input types are, as in, I need to calculate distance or, say a time estimate for some trip. I need like speed and distance. And I don't need to know how to actually do the calculation, but I know that I need those two things. And then you can do various analysis about like if I want to use this function in another function, then it needs that information somewhere without actually knowing how that information is used. So I feel like that's useful for like thinking about SI stuff because SI like doesn't really have like it doesn't say much about how the programs work. It's meant to be general over how the programs work, but type information we can't like you can't sort of like get away from the idea that like information is in there somewhere of a particular kind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's intended that you can make the programs work in any way. Like, it's supposed to be compatible with like all sorts of approaches.
Yeah, I mean that seemed like an issue to me, which is partially about what this like thing is trying to build up to. Um, yeah.
I'm kind of skeptical of ideas as functions model.
Um, oh yeah, so I uh like two things further, I say that they're actually data, not functions. Um, but it's easier to talk about it, or I thought it was easier to talk about them as just functions at that point, before I abstract them more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with data either. Like, I think you need a complex type, like, an object-oriented class that has functions and data encapsulated in a single thing, more like that.
Um,
Because they need to be able to have like an active role, but they also have a data element.
yeah, so the way that, I mean, in terms of like functional programming, the way you might do the same sorts of things is so like a class has these methods attached to them, which are in essence just a function where the first argument is the object. Um, and if you model it like that, then you can have pure functions, and the class is like the everything like wrapped up in the class becomes um, just data and no functions. When we have sort of this idea of being able to call something that uses, like, where say the function itself has no arguments, but it's got a lot of like data that's encoded in it, sort of thing, um, then you can represent that as like the partial application of a more general function. So that's sort of the idea behind this. I guess another way to put it is the stuff that I'm like thinking about as inputs to these functions. There's no limit on how much data or what the sort of data we put into those are. Um, yeah.
I think it's jumping way too much into detail. It's generally better to start with a higher level overview. What are like the main concepts? What are they building on? What problems are they trying to solve? And what's like a general description of how they solve it? And if all that stuff is sorted out, then you can look at what are the details of the solution, and do I want to analyze some of the details to see if they don't work. But most of the time, or I don't know about most, a lot of the time, it's like you don't always get to the detail level. Lots of things fail in the earlier stages when you're just looking at the big picture and like, does the general concept make sense? Is the plan okay? And jumping into details is really common in conversations, but more time on like meta issues and organization and like choosing where to focus, I think is more efficient.
Yep. Yeah, so like one sort of idea that uh I thought might like that sort of came out of this is like most of the like this tree is spent like establishing some kind of like a sort of pseudo model for how ideas work. And
Yeah, and I don't think the SI people agree with that. I think you're just on a different page than them. You're talking
yeah,
about your own framework too much, and it doesn't have much to do with their theory.
so yeah, I guess the reason that I was thinking about this is um so if I can create, or like I've got some intuition about how things work, or about maybe a way to represent how they work. Um, I guess this might be where a communication sort of thing falls down between CR and SI. Um, my sort of approach is like if like everyone should be free to come up with like alternate ways of like expressing something, sort of like how ideas work like this. And then if there's not a problem with that construction, then like if there's no sort of like good criticisms of it or whatever, then it should be possible that like it should converge with any other true thing. So like if SI is like if its claims are about what it does are true, then and we don't have a problem with like a model that I put together, then we should be able to like use the two to contrast against each other to either find out new stuff or find out where problems are or things like that. Um, I don't know if
Yeah,
that's something, yeah, people
so
generally.
that kind of thing should work in theory, but it's often more difficult because now you're
Yeah,
dealing with two systems and trying to bridge the gap between them and figuring out how they're related and all that. It can be just a bunch of work, and a lot of the times one or both of them turns out to just be wrong anyway, so the bridging never works out. And trying to do that bridging is often not the best or fastest or most efficient way to criticize either of the ideas. Like often you can criticize them much more quickly just looking at them on their own terms, without having to bring in a complex other structure and then trying to relate them to each other. That's like a bit of a last resort for criticizing something, just because of the added difficulty and complexity.
yep,
Like it's preferable if you can just find internal contradictions or something more like that. Like on their own premises and values and goals and whatever, is it broken? Because usually it is when it's wrong. Most
yep,
errors don't require saying you have a consistent framework and system and so on, but I think your framework's wrong, and I think this other framework is better, and here's how we like compare frameworks. Like you usually don't have to get into all that, which is Because like rival frameworks that disagree about like how to evaluate ideas themselves are hard to deal with, but it's usually not necessary.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess part of the reason that I did this from like in terms of those things is that I think there are like some important contradictions or issues with SI, but in terms of like explaining them, I feel like I then need to like take a step back and try and build up some framework to like explain how those contradictions come about, um, or like where and how to look for something. So like part of the point of this was not necessarily to show like an internal contradiction. Um, maybe that would be one of the outcomes, but to try and find like so in the same way that when oh, it's not here, it's further on. Um, uh, like you can, so with say simultaneous equations, you've got say something that you know that you're like interested in, and then you introduce some other bit of knowledge, and the combination of those two things allows you to pin down like fixed points, like the intersection between two lines or something like that. Um, and so, yeah, I guess part of the goal of this was to try and find a fixed point like that. Um, so that's why I start talking about like quines and things as a way to like yeah, if you can define like outputs in terms of inputs, then there's the potential to like maybe not in this case, but in other cases like do algebraic analysis to figure out like a particular solution to a particular problem, but that problem has like reach because of the self-referential nature.
I think this stuff is too foreign to their system. It's important to try to figure out like what are their premises, what are their building blocks, what can be done with those things, what are the limits of their system, what sort of power does it have, etc. How is it supposed to work? And in general, it's important to try to understand ideas on their own terms before disagreeing with them or uh, trying to introduce your own foreign stuff to the discussion. Like you can focus on just what is this idea and try to understand it without distracting with a different system. And if you find that it's hard to analyze their ideas and you need other tools and stuff, instead of introducing them, you can like ask people, you can say your system seems incomplete. I want to like do this thing, but I don't see how to do it given your tools. Like, is there a native way of doing it that you guys would use? Or is this just something you think shouldn't be done? Or were you guys wrong and you just missed it? Like, um, so yeah, if you need stuff that's missing, you can criticize incompleteness, and that's often a lot clearer and simpler than introducing stuff and then trying to criticize based on that.
Yep.
Like it's better if you can entice them to introduce a bunch of stuff themselves that like they want, if you have anyone to actually talk to who's trying to present like a consistent system and whatever. But you can show them the problems for why something's missing rather than just tell them I'm going to add all this stuff and they don't, if they don't know why enough and they don't see the need themselves, then it's going to seem unfair, they're not going to get it.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah, Goldratt talks about some similar stuff about how to do presentations and like sometimes he talks about like presenting a problem and asking the other guy how he would solve it rather than leading with your solution. And if you can get the other guy to think of the solution you had in mind on his own, so he has more ownership in it, and it's not something he's just being externally told, but like if he understands the problem situation enough to come up with it himself, then you're actually on the same page and it'll probably work out.
Yeah. Um, that yeah, that sort of general way of dealing with it has yeah, I think like uh occurred to me as like a good thing in like a teaching learning dynamic, as well as like when people think of a solution themselves, like they believe they have some ownership over it. It's like the framing changes from one that's like adversarial to like more cooperative, which is good for
Yeah,
actually getting somewhere.
yeah, improving cooperation is another aspect that helps too.
Yep.
Right, so like if you posted this tree on LessWrong, it's not going to come off cooperative to them.
Yep.
There are various reasons it's difficult to cooperate with them. Like they don't do a good enough job of presenting their position so that you could engage with it, and they don't do a good enough job of answering questions in a like reliable, consistent way because there's sort of no one in charge and it's all chaos. So it makes it hard to engage. So there's difficulties, but regardless of the difficulties, this is probably not going to get a good response for the, despite the fact that it's hard to do something else.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't think I'm going to end up taking this taking any SI stuff much further, particularly because I'm just like starting to like think about other stuff and lose interest in the SI stuff. Partially because of the issues with like LessWrong as a community. It feels like it's actually like there's a much smaller set of active members on LessWrong than it maybe appears.
Yeah, I'm not sure how big they really are for our discussions. Some of the people who were talking with me were the same people talking with me 3 years previously, like GJM, Dagon, Christian KI, who came and said something nasty. Several of them seem to have held grudges for multiple years. William also responded to me 3 years ago, and Tag as well. There's a bunch of repetition there.
Yep. Yeah. Just while I remembered one thing that I didn't note down earlier, but I thought might be like a thing to talk about. So, the guy, I can't remember his name now. The guy who was yeah, Richard Ngo. I'm
Oh
not sure how to
yeah.
pronounce. Um, anyway, yeah, and then yeah, you posted that he posted some like stuff about democracy on his thing, which obviously is interesting to me. But then yeah, so one thing I was thinking about, maybe it's good stuff between now and next session, would be like how to respond to stuff, like such that you end up with like a productive discussion. Because I'd be interested to talk to this guy about it. I think he makes some good points that other people don't spot, particularly like around issues with liquid democracy / delegative democracy. And so I think there could be like a decent productive discussion there, as well as his criticism on the LessWrong community seemed, um, uh, yeah, like he's reasonably open-minded and willing to like consider this sort of stuff.
Yeah. I wrote a response to him today, by the way, because of that stuff you pointed out. Um, so this is how I tried talking to him, but I'm now getting downvoted by other people. This is one of the things that's very hard about discussion forums with a variety of different people with different perspectives, is it's very hard to say things that all of them like at the same time. Like this was targeted to Richard, who I doubt downvoted it. But then other
Yeah,
people with different perspectives don't like it. And it's nested in an old thread, right? But it appears on the front page, which is a good thing in some ways, but I think like people are taking it out of context.
but it incentivizes like drive-by downvoting,
Yeah.
which I think is a big issue. Like that seems bad, as opposed to like people, yeah, replying without considering like the full context. Um,
Yeah, they're actually very hostile to context the way they've designed their site. So you scroll down and you see recent discussion, and you'll see like some threading, but not enough.
Yeah. I also noticed that like the stuff here that's like 11 hours ago, but if I like just searching for your username there, your post doesn't come up even though it's marked as like 4 hours ago.
Oh,
Um,
probably because it's downvoted. It's like karma affects what shows up.
so that's like, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, oh, it got downvoted, so we won't show it to people anymore. Um, as a like, there's some echo chambery type mechanics there.
Yeah,
I also,
but look at this comment permalink though. Like whenever you click on the permalink for comments, it's a single comment with no context and a see context button, which is actually put above the main post. Like it's quite a weird format,
yeah, at least
which is
Reddit will, yeah, like actually link you to the comment in the page and indicate what's beforehand.
right. Whereas they intentionally separate it from the parent to highlight it like in isolation.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about that, if they did, like, I don't think it's necessarily bad to focus on the comment itself, but the fact that they don't even show, like, whether there were replies above it or things, like in a collapsed format, um, like, that would be a reasonable
Hmm.
thing that doesn't change too much about it. Um, but, um, but yeah, I also noticed that, like, when Richard points out that a couple of like those comments have been downvoted to negative karma, and I looked at them now, and both of them they were like 9 the other day, and now they're 10. Um, which I think is
Yeah.
like, yeah, bad. In that they're being upvoted because he pointed out they were downvoted, not because the community judged that they were like worthwhile at the time or whatever else.
Yeah, the community papers over problems. Like they're like, oh, there's a problem, let's fix it, and then they're just sort of burying the evidence
Yeah,
because it was evidence that there's a pattern, and they're fixing a single case that got pointed out, which just obscures the pattern.
yeah. Not to mention, like, I mean, he finishes. It's particularly sad this happens when I'm trying to explain why this community is failing at a key goal. Um, and then now there's the impression that it's not failing at that key goal, or is failing less at that key goal. And so it's yeah, it's just smoothing over an issue as opposed to actually dealing with it. But yeah,
Well, I hit load more like 10 times or something, and I still didn't find my comment.
so that's well, at least you know that they're not like personalizing it too much. In that like not showing it to me, but they would show it to you, sort of thing, which I think would be worse.
Ah, right. I was not suspicious of a shadow ban. I was just suspicious of like a few early votes having an outsized impact.
Yeah,
Which doesn't particularly matter. Like now other people won't see it and downvote it. Because I was only trying to talk to one person.
it'd be nice if there was I mean, for stuff like that, like a don't show on front page button.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use direct messages. I don't want to do that.
No, then it's not public.
Yeah.
But yeah. When you mentioned that Goldratt talks about some stuff like the presentation things,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think there's a bit of this in the choice. Are there other references for that, like other books that talk about it or talk about it in more detail?
Yeah, I think there's some in It's Not Luck. And there's a lot in the Goldratt satellite program videos.
Yeah. It feels like it's pretty general. Like there's this sort of thing is like background in a lot of stuff. Like it feels like the methodology that's sort of expressed in the goal has a bit of this of like the Socratean sort of questioning sort of stuff. in helping the team come to the realization themselves as opposed to just being told. Are those videos free, by the way, or
No.
sold? No.
No, this site is horrible to deal with. Like they want you to sign up for subscriptions and then watch videos at 1x in their proprietary player that's 10 years old or something.
And you like can't download them or can't do anything else with them, presumably.
They don't want you to.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I wonder if yeah, if any of this was, or if all that sort of stuff is after Goldratt died, which I think was that, no, it wasn't 2008, it was like 2011.
Yeah, the website, I mean, I don't know. The website seems very old. Like maybe this was put up when Goldratt was alive and the internet was different and e-commerce was different and they haven't updated it.
Yeah, looks like they've updated some of it, but depending on the thing, like if they used a WordPress thing, then obviously there's lots of plugins and stuff they could do there. Yeah.
Yeah, his stuff is spread out a bit. This series was an attempt to make something like comprehensive, like a complete set of things.
Hmm. Yeah, it looks like it's higher level as well in terms of stuff like distribution and supply chain. It's like applied to things, is I guess what I mean.
Yeah, he wanted something that could transform a whole company that would explain like all the divisions of the company.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess that sounds like it was trying to deal with that problem that he mentioned about like having limited I guess like the theory of constraints would be adopted by some people and they wouldn't be able to spread it throughout the company, and then ultimately the tradition would die out before it could like be embedded
Oh, yeah, you're
particularly
getting that
usefully.
from his Poogie forum newsletters that I was reading, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yep.
he started that newsletter immediately after doing this series. And he was talking about the motivation for this series in the newsletter
Yep.
to the people he had recruited via this course.
That makes sense. Is oh, okay. I was going to say, how long were some of those sentences you wrote? But there are some periods that I didn't spot.
Oh,
There
yeah.
was the quote aside. That's but then yeah, that was, I missed this period. Um,
Yeah, this sentence appears to have two semicolons. So there's breakups, but it is a little long. It's
yeah,
there's several reasons. Like one, I don't think that editing it would make much difference to if Richard is the person I want to type of if he's the type of person suitable to have a conversation with. I don't think editing this better is going to be like the deciding factor. And making things a little bit rambly makes them socially less aggressive.
yep, yeah, I agree. Like stream of consciousness type stuff is more casual than, yeah, than when you try and write something super specifically or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I might take this lull in conversation just a bathroom break, and we're back in a tick. Kill back.
Okay, let's take a look at this one.
Yep.
So, have you skimmed it or anything yet?
So I've read it pretty closely.
Oh, okay.
The last stuff not so much because I don't think it's as core or as interesting. But yeah, but no, I read it yesterday, I think.
Okay, so do you think it's good?
I think some of it's good. I think there are there are some problems with it, and one of the things that I sort of feel like he's not addressing is there's like parallels between like direct democracy as taking into account everyone and like 30 million people or 300 million people voting. But uh, after you get rid of the representational aspect of uh, like Westminster and Washington systems, you've essentially got like Congress in the US is like a direct democracy of 500 people, sort of thing at that level. And I think that there are some of the criticisms of direct democracy in general apply to like houses of parliament or legislatures in general as well. And he doesn't really deal with that. He sort of hints at it a bit in that there's like ideas about specialization in here.
Okay.
There's also some other stuff about specialization that I think is wrong on. So like dealing with like adding expertise, particularly in like some particular areas, which I don't think makes sense.
Okay, let's try something specific. Hide the article, and then try to write an outline of his article from memory, and see if you can remember what it was about, what the main points were in order, and how it fit together.
Okay. All right, so I haven't, besides like skimming it just then, I haven't read it today. So let's go.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about the details. The point is like, what were the main concepts? Like, what was, uh, yeah, just the high level overview. Yeah, so far those are the right type of statements. I haven't read the article, but
Um, oh,
This looks a little
um,
disorganized to me, but it might be that way in the original post. Like, it might not be your fault. I don't know.
yeah, I'm having more trouble remembering this stuff. These are confidence things.
Yeah,
Because
if
there
you're
were
having
4
trouble
main points.
remembering, just do higher level, like even like one sentence per paragraph or one sentence to summarize a section, what it was about, just so you have something.
Yep. Um, um, all right, so that's, I don't think I'm going to get too much more than that. There might be some details I could think of, but that's roughly speaking what yeah, that's a reasonable from memory thing at the moment.
Okay,
Um,
so it seems sort of informational, like it doesn't have a strong thesis about, I'm going to argue this. It's more, here's some thoughts, here's some sort of related thoughts. I mean, I think the thesis is sort of melting democracy might be a useful mix, something like that.
yeah. Um, I think what like he's proposing it as an alternate system. Um, so yeah, so like here. Um, there's yeah, he is actually like proposing something. And I've skipped some details that I like had in mind, but didn't write down. So like when I say we could do elections with liquid democracy, um, that's like all of this paragraph. Oh yeah, one of the big points I did miss um, was
This sentence, I think, is interesting. It sounds wrong to me because in liquid democracy, wouldn't people delegate to whoever they think is going to do a good job? If it's a full-time job, they'll delegate to people who are working on it as a full-time job. But if someone who has an actual job and it's only a side hobby for them is doing a better job at this stuff, then people will delegate to them, even though they can do it like faster.
yep. Um, there's also like people who are doing this sort of stuff but aren't in a representative job, like think tanks do this sort of thing. Sometimes
Yeah,
people do it in the course of business. Um, yeah. So I also think there are other potential solutions there in terms of stuff like, and there might be issues with this, but things like in like liquid democracy, you could like pay people based on like how many delegates they have and things like that, so that they have more freedom to do this sort of thing.
right.
There's other ways to deal with it. Essentially, you don't have to like I think a better, like, one thing that stood out to me about this sentence was that, like, so while I'm not 100% convinced that the role of representatives is to design, advocate, and implement good policies, or at least I'm not convinced that that's what they do, I'm willing to like accept it for the case of the argument, sake of the argument. But I think a better conclusion is that these things still need to happen somewhere, and so any system has to have an answer for where do these things happen, as opposed to like it needs to stay with representatives. Because if they happen elsewhere, who cares where they come from, as long as like the laws that we pass are good.
The people who are delegating a bunch of votes to someone could also like send him money if they care that much.
Yeah,
And on top of that, instead of a tax system where the government says you got this many votes, we're going to give you money, you could have something more like the voters themselves are able to delegate some of their own tax dollars, like 2% or whatever, if they want to. And that way, like, if someone needs the money and has a bunch of grassroots support, maybe he'll get a bunch of delegated money. And then if it's like a rich establishment politician, a lot of his supporters probably won't delegate him money because he doesn't need it anyways.
yep. There are also like a lot of problems with the way that like public funding is done. I'm not sure if, oh, they don't mention it here. Anyway, so there's like a bunch of stuff that happens in Australia around like funding parties and things for elections. So there's two things. One, if you get more than 4% of the primary vote, then in that electorate you get, it's like $2.70 or something per vote. So which in like in a state like New South Wales, there's say 5 million voters. So 4% is, we're talking like $750,000 or something minimum. But if you fall under that, you don't get it. And also that your candidate fees are called a deposit, but you only ever get the deposit back if you get more than 4% as well. So there's like even with places with like electoral funding and potentially like large amounts of electoral funding, there's still like lots of issues there. I mean, his point here, like he's got stuff about a natural funnel into Parliament, like making it easier for new people or new ideas to get in there. But there's lots of ways we could do that without changing anything about like introducing new systems. Just being less exclusive on who gets electoral funding would be one way. And doing something with like a tax delegation where you can actually, like, say 1% of your tax dollars you can funnel to whatever political party or person, elected or not, that you want to support, or split it up between multiple ones. I think that would be like a much better way to do it. Though 1% is reasonably high from a national point of view, I think.
Oh yeah, I don't know the numbers. Doesn't matter.
Whoops.
If you can see total tax revenues, a lot of it's not gonna be an income tax.
Oh yeah,
You
that's
got
true.
like other categories.
So yeah. Um, but yeah, I think about $200 million are dispersed at each federal election for electoral funding. So that's like $10 per person. That should be too high because there's only 15 million voters in Australia, and they vote twice, so that'd be about $5 each. But yeah.
Wait, what's the difference between this and liquid? I didn't. He said it's a modest change. What is it a modest change from?
It's a
Representative
modest
or
change
from liquid?
from representative, I think. So modest change from our current systems. The idea is that, or maybe it's a modest, I don't know. It can be seen as both. Oh no, probably liquid democracy. He says a watered down version of liquid democracy. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, The idea being that like instead of everyone going to vote, then only delegates would need to go to vote, essentially. Which saves a lot of time and money, at least.
Right. What was his watering down though? Like, I think he doesn't present it well. He doesn't explain what part of liquid democracy specifically he wants to remove in order to water it down, and why that part was causing trouble.
In many ways, he hasn't removed anything. He's added stuff. So he's added like a representative democracy on top of liquid democracy, or arguably added liquid democracy underneath representative democracy. So, which I agree is an odd way to say that it's watered down because you're adding stuff to both versions,
I don't think he
whichever way you look at it.
explains it enough. Like, he's trying to introduce a new idea, and then this is the paragraph where you're supposed to find out what it is.
Yep.
Maybe you could follow because you're like involved in this stuff for years, like as a major thing. But I think most people will be totally lost.
Yeah. Yep. No, I can see that. It didn't strike me as like it. I guess this is in sort of a dangerous sort of situation as well, in that it didn't strike me as something that was particularly unclear. And I haven't thought about exactly this idea before, but I've thought a lot about like liquid democracy and representative democracy. So I like was able to come up with an idea of what he meant fairly like quickly without much effort, but I am not actually sure if I've necessarily got exactly the same idea as him. It seems consistent with the rest of stuff, but it might be easy for me to fool myself in that regard. So I don't think he does enough to answer these potential problems as well, or why that they would be better than the sort of analogous problems in representative democracy.
Okay. So if you write a reply, what would your goal be?
Yep. So I am slightly happy, by the way, that I, just as you were saying that, was thinking pretty much exactly the same question. And then I'm happy that I'm starting to think about like my goals more upfront rather than jumping into things. So
Oh yeah, what country was he from? It said somewhere.
oh, his I think that was on his LessWrong profile. But I think he was Kiwi and lives in Berlin or something.
Oh, this one says he's in the UK, but he grew up in New Zealand.
Yeah, that might be the same as his. Yeah, based in London, so it's the same as here.
Okay.
So I presume he's been working in London for a while, presumably with Google, because I think Google owned DeepMind. Oh, he went to uni in the UK.
Okay, so he's not in your country.
No. Though he is talking about stuff sort of generally, and a lot of the stuff that I've thought about has included like systems that other countries use.
Hmm.
So yeah, so like New Zealand has a system called mixed member proportional, for example, that I used to be a fan of before reading BOI. Um, so I think broadly, these are probably pretty representative. So yeah, part of it is that this is like content generation. I guess part of that. I'm not sure if this is good. The and I put appearance there as well because like I think people are not very good at figuring out what goodwill is. But it's something that people would perceive as good. There's so just practice for me. There's generating interesting content. This is sort of a decent one. Oh, there's other.
So how available are people interested in this stuff? Like, is this rare or common?
It's somewhat common in some circles. So like in the blockchain world, there's not a whole heap of thought about this, but there has been like ongoing sort of discussion over the past half decade or so. A lot of it centered around liquid democracy. In terms of in like political philosophy type thing or like academic stuff, I haven't found much in the way of people engaging on this sort of level. Usually it's either lower level stuff in similar to like psychology type things where people are trying to do like case studies on citizen juries or things, or like are advocating like a particular system and not trying to actively develop ideas, I guess. Yeah, so it's not super common for someone to actually be thinking about like criticisms of stuff like liquid democracy, and trying to come up with anything new.
Yeah, and he doesn't sound like a blockchain guy. Like, went to uni and studied philosophy and AGI type stuff.
Mm. I presume that he would know of it, but it wouldn't. I mean, it doesn't look like he's got any particular interest in blockchain stuff, besides maybe like a passing interest because it's a new area of computer science.
Right. So it's the chance to talk to someone from a different subculture, probably.
Mm. Um, yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely from a different subculture, which is good because it's been really hard to find. It's hard to find people who have considered things like enough to not be like reacting to like really basic stuff. Um, so like for example, people who are willing to like explore the idea that the will of the people is not what democracy should be doing.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like people often, get stuck super early, and then you can't really have a productive or it's really hard to have a productive conversation with them, I feel.
Yeah, most people run out of patience before they do enough back and forth to get through the initial stuff to the more interesting later stuff. Very common problem when you know a bunch of stuff and the other guy doesn't.
Yep.
Or even if you both know a bunch of stuff but you disagree, they often run out of patience before you actually talk about the advanced stuff.
Yep. Yep. That's like inferential distance, like getting across that sort of gap. I presume is roughly the idea.
Well, it's partly that, but it's partly like you start on the issue and it branches. Like you say something like a standard thing you've said a million times. And then there's like three standard replies, but you don't know which one they're gonna do. So then they say one, and now you've cut down the space of things to worry about. And then they ask you a question, and you say something, and it cuts down dramatically on the positions you might have in their mind. And you go back and forth a few times until you get to the first answer that surprises the other guy, that's something new. And if you both know a lot, it can take a while to get to the first new thing. And then some people quit before then, they run out of patience.
Yeah. One thing that I'm sort of thinking about looking at some of the things here in his archive. So this is a book that was like recommended to me, Why Nations Fail, that I've never really gotten around to reading because I don't know of a good reason to read it. I guess it's quite thick. It's sort of 75% the size of Atlas Shrugged, but probably has thicker pages. I'm wondering how much I should read of his other stuff before to avoid, or well, just because of like potential biases.
I don't think you really need to read his other stuff. Like, you don't have goals where he's super important. It's not like that big a deal if things don't go well with him individually. So I don't
Yeah.
think it makes sense to invest a lot of extra effort on fairly like low effectiveness ways of getting along with him better. Oh, this archive is done manually. The melting one's not in it yet.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because it doesn't have like dates and the categories just like it. Yeah. I wonder if there's any posts that he doesn't put there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's intentional or he just didn't get around to it yet.
Unless no, okay, no, a new solution is. Oh, this is presumably about like Israel. That's not what I thought it
These
would be
two
about.
posts are in the archive, so just the newest one isn't.
Yeah, okay.
Although it is months old. Okay, so right. So what is a plan in order to achieve some of your goals? And what sort of things will you need to include in your post? And you can consider like meta planning, like how long should the post be? How much effort should you put into it? Like how much do you want to put effort in like immediately versus uh like try to get things started and then put in effort later in certain scenarios if he's engaging.
Um, Okay, so this feels like a reasonable way to address the goals that I've written down so far.
Okay, so this is a bunch of stuff. So what information do you need to trigger like doing each of these actions? Like, which ones are suitable to do immediately just to start with? And what actions would you like only do contingent on some events happening? And
Yep.
then my thought process is if you know what information you need in order to be able to do all this stuff, you know, in the good case, get the positive version of the info, then you can specifically try to get that info in your initial action.
Yeah, okay, cool. So there's some immediate stuff that I don't need anything more on. So like mapping out his ideas. Uh, um, these are like roughly ordered as well, but things that, you know, there's no blockers besides the stuff above them.
So are these all things you would be happy to do even if he just like ghosted you?
Well, some of them I think I need to do even if he ghosted me. Though that's wrong. So, like, oops. Like, what would I do if he wasn't interested in discussing? Like, if I knew that up front, would I still write a post responding to his post? I think there's like benefits to doing that in general. Like, someone else has put out a new idea about how to do democracy. I think it's good for me to, or it's good to publish like content on that or like issues that I see with that. But if he's not willing to discuss, then maybe the level of effort would be lower because why bother type thing. If like it's only then for like myself and other people, not for him, that I'd be doing that if he wasn't interested in discussing. The comment, oh, so the comment I think might be good to write anyway, but I can do that with less stuff without like without actually writing a full-on response. So the response is higher effort, more time. So I can write a comment with like some ideas and then and like asking for other stuff and seeing if he's interested in having a discussion about it. And doing that before writing anything higher effort. I can post that comment on my side and stuff as well.
Yep.
Mapping out his ideas, I think I should do a little bit anyway, maybe not in full detail, but at least to facilitate the rest and make sure that I've got a decent grasp of his idea. And I want to do this anyway, so that's sort of like just off down the bottom. But is synergistic with this. Yeah. So this is like, yeah, a light analysis, and this would be a more detailed one if he was interested in talking about that sort of stuff. Because I think as well, it's one of those things where it's reasonable to like expect that if you want people to consider your ideas like and provide criticisms, then you should be willing to do that for their ideas. You shouldn't just like dismiss it and then expect free stuff from them. That would be unreasonable.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's something wrong with that in that there's sort of like a quid pro quo type arrangement, but it feels sort of reasonable while you're both figuring out whether you want to keep going.
Yeah, you just have to be careful because people often don't hold up what you would hope for.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to try to find ways to invest in things that it's okay if they don't do anything. So you have to have like multi-purpose action. Like instead of writing a very parochial post for a particular person, yeah, if you write a parochial post, it's risky because if they ghost you, then it's kind of a failure. But if you write it in a more general interest way, and it fits your general interests and so on, then it doesn't matter that much what they do, and their actions can be a bonus. It's safer, lower risk to get more parochial the more you've talked with them if you've had like a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are actually, I mean, there's at least a few times in, I think actually, yeah, back in like 2015 or 2016, I tried responding to some people who wrote stuff. Where's an example? And didn't get replies. So yeah, this is like a direct response to this guy. I think I might have posted, this was fairly early on. Wow, there we go. The site doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, but I just got like, yeah, no response, no interest. And then
Yeah. One of the
I'm
things
not
I
sure.
found is you can filter out like 90% of people just on whether they will claim to be like important, serious, highly interested in discussion, etc. Most of the people don't actually claim those things. Like, the guy whose blog doesn't even exist a couple of years later, probably never really claimed that he mattered.
Yeah, yeah. This reminds me of a discussion, a back and forth I had on Twitter some time ago. Maybe it was 6+ months ago. It might have been earlier. Anyway, with a like an academic studying democracy stuff in Ireland, I think. Anyway, it didn't end up. It was quite unproductive. I thought she was pretty mean. Anyway, yeah. But that might be. I don't know if it's worth analyzing that at some point. But yeah, that was a reasonable back and forward. But I'm also not sure if I was like fair in what I said. It was about a book. She asked me whether I'd read her book, and I said no. Then I had issues with the blurb.
Oh, yeah, they don't like that, but I think it is fair.
It's yeah. My idea was basically that like this is the sales pitch for a book. If there are issues with the blurb, why would I expect that those blurb like that there's not more issues with the book, sort of thing. And I think she responded something like, well, like you're free to get in touch and complain to my publisher or something like that. Which I'm not sure if she was trying to say that she didn't approve of the blurb either.
Right, that's intentionally ambiguous. Um,
Hmm.
the blurbs are not. You have to be careful with blurbs because they're sometimes written by the publisher or whatever. So it can be better to use like something from chapter one. But regardless, people tend to be very hostile. It's what we talked about at the beginning. Um, because they have like weight of the evidence views, and they're like, you read 1% of the book, and now you're attacking it, but the other 99% might be good. How can you possibly reach a judgment about the whole book when at most you have a problem with 1% of it that you've read? Like they don't think you can
Yeah.
have enough, like a strong enough argument about the rest of it. You need like, many arguments about many parts, where it's probably
So
still positive on balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a problem there in terms of, oh, you could make the same argument about you've only read 20% of the book, but what about the other 80%? But moreover, it doesn't address the actual thing that I was claiming, which is like I don't have a good reason to read this book or believe that there's like I'm going to get anything out of it. And that was like the actual problem, is that I don't know why I would do it. And then I wasn't even interested in it reading the blurb. So what would be the point? Yeah, and if the response is to get defensive, then it's not going to make me more interested in reading the book. Not to mention some of the stuff that she said was like particularly mean, which I thought was unfair and not okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the world. You have to like, it's not about you.
Mm.
It's about their life and what they're used to. And yeah, you just have to focus on better things.
That's roughly what I took away from it. Was that, I mean, it didn't really bother me or whatever else. It was just like, whatever. Go off and live my life. But yeah,
Anyways,
okay,
okay,
so
so about this stuff. It's it's a bit complex. So you wanna like you wanna look at what previous discussions you've had that worked and at most go, 10-20% more complex than those. Like you want to start what is the simplest thing that will work pretty well, like minimum viable product. And unless you're really confident, just start there and try to get that to work. And if it doesn't work, try again somewhere else until you get that working, and then you can expand on it.
yeah, I'm sort of, it's a bit of a challenge to think about this in the sense that like previous discussions that have worked, no good examples come to mind.
Yeah,
There's like
partly
some
it's
short
hard
discussions.
because a lot of discussions um it's hard to give like a single evaluation. Like sometimes they start off pretty good and then they like totally break later. So as far as like bigger picture and long-term goals, they failed. But for the first 2/3 of it, you're meeting some short-term goals. So like it was partly working. Some things worked. It's not like nothing worked.
Yeah. I feel like one of the sort of things or concerns or thoughts that I'm got at the moment is discussions need like a consenting counterparty, like someone to actually reply. It's hard to, or it feels like it's hard in some ways to make progress fast because someone else is potentially a bottleneck. But if you have lots of discussions at the same time, then that can be bad for other reasons, not just splitting attention, but you can make the same mistake over and over again. Yeah, I don't know if there's a good solution besides just like picking good discussion partners and taking it at a reasonable pace and reevaluating it as you go along.
It's easier to have discussions with people who have a lot of writing. If they have a large like literature or videos or something of their ideas, then you're less reliant on waiting for them to tell you what they think about things. You can go look it up more. Um, so you can control the pacing a lot more and have a lot more flexibility of what you want to look into, etc. The more the person like has no archive, then you have to rely on just talking to them and asking them stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Sort of interesting in that I think a lot of people might not intuitively link like an archive of writing to your ability to have a good quality discussion. Um, like they think that you can have a good quality discussion without an archive, which I guess is not impossible. It's just much harder.
Yeah. Uh, there's goals for discussion differ. That's one of the problems with asking people if they want a discussion. That's why I often put qualifiers on it. Because they, like, discussion often means we talk for a while. Like, the standard model is we meet in person, we talk until someone leaves or, nighttime or something. Or
Yeah.
something comes up, like someone else comes by and wants to talk. And we have an appointment. And so discussion is like a very short-term thing. And more of the FI model of building up a literature or an archive or whatever over time in an organized way with canonical material and so on is not what people normally are looking for. Similarly, the standard view of a discussion doesn't involve much literature. Maybe you throw in a few sites, but they're like footnotes. People are talking about their own ideas instead of building on and talking about published ideas. They're not taking, these are the published ideas, let's treat them as building blocks and like move them around and see how we can put them together. So the focus would be on like other people's ideas that are in the literature. Their focus is usually on their own pet ideas and personal ideas, and they make it much more parochial.
Yeah. Which then means as well that there's not nearly as many good resources to actually try and understand what their point is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's, well, I mean, even if you do have like original ideas, like you're not relying on anyone's ideas in particular from before you, having an archive of stuff that you've written is still helpful there. Well, I guess what's the difference between someone else's idea in a book and like your idea in a post?
Yeah.
Realistically, like, yeah,
The only
prestige or
difference is
reach or
obscurity level. There's a problem
mm,
when the sort of public discussion gets too splintered and there's too many different contributors and it's hard to deal with everything. If we just took like the most famous stuff and more people focused on that and tried to actually resolve things and get to conclusions, I think that would help instead of everyone talking about their own pet ideas. Because the popular people are not perfect or anything. But even if they're not even better, even if they're just like average or something, lots of people focusing attention on the same ideas, having like convergence points, has value.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I was thinking about the more like decentralized sort of discussions, like when there's lots and lots of people interacting. Um, my intuition is that they tend to center around most of the discussion is not very useful, but the useful discussion tends to center around like a named problem. Um, so like in like AI, it might be like the paperclip machine type thing, or whatever people call it. If they mention paperclips, everyone's roughly already synchronized. But it
Uh-huh.
takes like someone to publish a complete problem, potentially in like great detail, for that to happen. And yeah, when things happen off to the fringe, they're not unless there's then like a problem that gets brought up then that people can then like look at there and it becomes a new sort of focal point. But yeah, but outside of that, it's yeah, discussions are nowhere near as productive as like when you have a back and forth with the same person. Particularly because you can't how do you focus on solving like a problem in someone's understanding when lots of people are talking about a thing? Um, it's yeah, that chaos doesn't, I don't think, helps organization of ideas.
Yeah. A lot of the main value of discussion is that you can get and give feedback on ideas and criticism and stuff. Whereas when you like read a book, even if it can give a reasonably complete presentation of something, but first of all, it's never fully complete. You always have to fill in a bunch of gaps mentally, and you're going to have questions, and hopefully there's supplemental materials. But also, if you talk to other people who are, fans of the book or perhaps part of the community, hopefully there's a living tradition of people who know about this stuff, then you can get answers to fill in some of the blanks. Because the book will never fully communicate everything perfectly to you. And it's hard to catch all your own errors. Like you can catch some of your own errors, but you should expect to miss some as well. So getting external perspectives is really helpful for catching a portion of your own errors that you missed.
Yeah. This reminds me of a thing that a friend of mine sent that I don't think they'd mind if I read it, but it's about reading through Beginning of Infinity and like particularly with errors in or like discussion or things like that or holding off or stuff like that. And I figured it might be useful to, I mean, it's sort of related to this, but because we're near the end, it might be useful to yeah, talk about this a bit. I've got some ideas, but I feel like I'm not going to be as good at answering the question as you might, and then it might be useful for both this person and other people.
Okay.
So yeah, so we'll say Alice, Alice because that's the name everyone gets by default. So they say they're 15% through BOI. So this sort of point stood out to me as in like a couple of days ago, and being 15% through feels. I mean, that's like, what is that, like 60 pages or something? It's the first 2 chapters maybe.
Does that sound high or low to you?
I think that's fast, potentially
Okay.
too fast. I mean, it took me like I read it at least 2 hours a day for at least a month, sort of thing. That includes like like reading something and then putting the book down and like walking around for 10 minutes thinking about it, picking it back up, that sort of thing. But yeah, like on average, maybe say, I don't know if I mean, if it took me like a month or a month and a half, 30 days, getting 15% through would be, I guess that's only like what, 4.5 days or something, right? So maybe that's reasonable. I don't know. Sorry, phone screen. Yeah, so I think like not writing questions down is a mistake to start with. So these are paraphrased and these are quotes, excluding typos. Yeah, I think the idea of reading it twice is good, but I'm not convinced that Alice should wait till like the later chapters to see if questions were answered. I mean, particularly one thing they could do is like ask me if I thought the question was answered, and if I thought it was answered in the earlier material, that would like make waiting for later chapters to be a mistake potentially.
Yeah. One of the problems with the reading twice method, like, I think it can be a very good method, but people usually don't do it. They plan to do it, and then they don't do the second reading. So that is the main problem with that method, I think.
Yeah. I mean, even like I've read most chapters at least twice, but not all of them. Like there are some chapters that I've only read once, and some chapters that I've read more, like 3 or 4 times. But that's like been going back at like a, there's a particular thing that I want to reread or stuff. Sometimes that's not even reading the whole chapter. It's like skimming and reading particular parts, which still leaves gaps that I might miss stuff. So it's like so Yeah, I haven't actually replied yet. I was meaning to the other day. I think I've got a draft on either one of my computers or the phone.
Yeah, it also depends on the type of question. Because some questions are like immediate problems, like I don't understand how this works, and then David's trying to build on it, and like you get confused. Other questions are just sort of tangential curiosities. You're like, it would be nice to know about this. Maybe he'll say more about it later. But it's not like necessary. It's not like the book is wrong if it never goes back to it.
Yeah.
Some questions are like, I think I understand what he's saying, so I can keep reading fine. But I think he's wrong because of this counter argument. What would his answer to that counter argument be? So the the urgency depends on what the question is.
Yeah.
And the importance of writing it down does too, because if it's just a curiosity and you don't write it down and then you forget about it, it doesn't really matter. But if it's like the kind of thing that makes a difference to whether you believe the book is right, then that's more important.
Yeah.
And also, some of it is just like a half-baked opinion, and some of it is something they're more confident in. So if they forget their half-baked opinions, who cares?
Do you have I mean, I don't think I've seen one. Do you have like a thread on Curie.us for discussing like BOI stuff particularly?
Let's see. Yeah, here's one. There are no comments, but yeah, there's a post announcing BOI stuff.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's 1536.
1536, yeah. I was gonna go to where is it? Open threads. If you click on open threads, you can find some of that type, but I don't know if there's one of those for it.
Oh, okay. These are threads like for general sort of discussions.
Yeah, these were specifically made to be like discussion threads,
Yep.
rather than like the post itself being very important.
Yep. Yep.
Anyways, yeah. I'm not immediately seeing one, but yeah, you just find a relevant post like that one and then you take it over the discussion.
Yep. In terms of this thing I've just highlighted, you've changed your mind on this, I presume. I presume the other stuff I've read, like that you've said on this topic, is more recent.
Yeah, I downgrade it to like tied with fabric for third, like still very high.
Yep.
I'd put Rand's two top books ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
It's not that important of a distinction. Like they're quite different
No.
books. It's hard to make a comparison. It doesn't matter that much.
Yep. They're reasonably orthogonal, though. I think they actually like a lot of the stuff does like where there is overlap, it's quite consistent. In terms of like the morality stuff in BOI, it's
Yeah,
like a
well,
different level of emergence, but yeah.
okay, so that's not just convergence. That's David read Rand. Like
Mm.
before writing his book, he read Rand like a long time ago before developing a lot of his ideas. So she was influential in his thought.
Yep. I presume it's fine to post questions here, by the way, if I tell Alice that they can
Yeah,
post
sure.
questions here. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, questions, book notes as they go along, anything about it, whatever.
Yeah. Because I wanted to, I feel like it's important to sort of reply to this sort of stuff because it's more important to like have good practices in books that have more knowledge than in like, lesser books as such. I've like recommended to Alice to read BOI for like years, by the way. So it's
Yeah,
good that
so
they're doing
another
it.
thing besides questions that I think is really important is if they run into any deal breakers, they need to save the quote at the time before they forget. Because people will get to the end of the book and be like, I really disagreed with several things. And it's really hard to debate them or deal with that problem at that point because they don't know exactly what it was. They don't have the quote, they don't have the page number, they don't remember exactly what it was, and they're like paraphrasing BOI incorrectly, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, yep.
So yeah, they should write down every major problem, like everything they hate about it, right as they get to it.
Yep.
So that there's some possibility of fixing it or dealing with it somehow.
Yep. It also allows them to keep track of it. Like if they, read something later on, then they know the difference between they can go back and they can check and they can say, oh no, I've actually changed my mind on this or whatever else, without having this sort of nebulous idea that they had some issues, but now they can't specifically refer to them. But yeah, okay, cool.
Yes.
Thanks for that.
So what's happening with work stuff? Do you want to do next week as normal?
Yeah. I was thinking about like whether I should, because I'm sort of finding that I've got a lot on my plate, whether I should like take a break from like these sessions for like a week. I'm been really hesitant to even like really go down that path too much. In terms of like work stuff and reducing load, I think let's do next week as normal, and then maybe like pencil in like the week after to have maybe 2 sessions, or 2 or 3. We can sort of play it by ear, but that might be more appropriate as a place to start reducing frequency.
Okay, so next week normal?
Yep. Let's do next week as normal.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Catch you in 3 days.
Yeah, later.